So that's a great segue, Kelly, into our next question. We wanted to talk to you a bit about adopting Chinyi and what that was like for you and for your family. I mean, it's amazing you guys adopted Chinyi from China. Was it 2003?
Yep.
And now he's 19. He's in college. I mean, just
Yeah.
it's amazing to see how he's grown. I remember when he first came over here and when he was very little to seeing him becoming a man today. It's very encouraging. But when you first adopted him and brought him back from China, what was that experience like for you? And did you feel any sense of pushback from family or people, friends that you grew up with and in your community?
No, not pushback so much. What we experienced is, isn't that a wonderful thing you're doing? Taking that poor little boy out of China and bringing him back to America. That was kind of the, which was, there's layers to that, right? Like,
like so many
layers to that. And my father, God rest his soul, would introduce him as his adopted Chinese grandson. So
instead of my grandson.
Here's my grandson, Chinyi. Like I figured out. Yeah. So there was some not intentional, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's people have their perceptions. They grow up with their perceptions, and those come out in the weirdest times, right? In the weirdest interactions. Because and I think it was really hard at first to not other him, right? He's something else. And I think in other people's or interactions, they othered him, right? He's that son, but not really. He's the other son, and he comes from something else, and he's not one of us. It's not overt, but there is that tendency, right? And we had to go through a process of self-discovery. One of the things that we really struggled with is, okay, he's from somewhere else. He comes from a culture that isn't ours. And to what extent does that remain important? And to what extent does he become integrated into absolutely everything of our culture? And how important is that distinction?
How'd you guys do that?
And what? Yeah, I mean, when he's two,
in fits and starts.
Yeah, when he's two, you go along with him and you try to give him experiences that are parallel, or your version of parallel of what he may have experienced somewhere else, including food and things like that. What you discover is that it actually, even though he was only 2 or approximately 2 when he came from China, there were many, many things that he had already picked up in the culture he was from.
And it's so many losses that you have to recognize and deal with when you're adopting a child from another country. I mean, the loss of language, and even though we tried, I mean, we brought him to Chinese families who had adopted from China. We belonged to a little group when we were in Boston, and there was a Chinese cultural center just down the street from where we lived, where we would go get letters translated from his foster parents, and so he, even though he had exposure, he lost a huge chunk of his culture. He would call me out as being racist. Like
in what form or context?
Yeah, what was that?
Sometimes jokingly, if I was decided that I like when we bought him a rice cooker, which he'd been asking for so long, then it was like, he gave this.
Give your Chinese son a rice cooker, you racist, right? I mean,
what could go wrong? Right?
He would call out. He would call out when we would stereotype or have actions that could be considered a stereotype for his race.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we were careful to actually be, sensitive to that in a way. But it was kind of an easy thing.
We were easy targets in his pre-teenagers for sure.
And I think
Sure.
you were that, you know, I feel like you were that safety net too for him.
Yeah.
You know, like you talked about, he was finally seeing himself with a group of boys that maybe for a long time he hadn't, or, you know, whatever. And so
Yeah.
I think you guys were that safety net for him to be able to, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
express.
Yeah, to learn what is and isn't racism versus just, you know, trying to be respectful of his cultural beginnings. Sometimes he would call it out as racism, right? If we wondered if he wanted, I mean, it's just silly things like wonder if he wants to go to Chinatown and get, oh, you're just being racist now. You know, I mean, it was him
That's
kind
your
of
first
working,
suggestion?
right,
Yeah.
working through when we were being accommodating, were we stereotyping or typecasting or whatever. And so it would be a joke, and it would also, but you want to be sensitive to it, because you don't know exactly the little processing of this young mind that's going on behind the scene, right?
Yeah.
So how
Even
did
if
you
it comes off-
navigate that through those formative years? What was your guys' process for navigating that?
It was tough. Because not only, I mean, was he dealing with figuring out his identity and how he fit, you know, in America, he was also just a teenager.
Right.
So, you know, he was a 13-year-old teenage boy. So we were dealing with all that as well.
Which means that you don't get a whole lot of communication as to what's going on inside.
Yeah.
When he's, you know, I mean, it's not something that comes boiling out, you know, well, what do you mean? What's behind that? You don't get anything back.
Yeah.
And so that was difficult. I think the kind of breakthrough was when we were able to take him back to China so that he could see where he came from.
Yeah.
When did you go
where
back?
he's born.
When he was
14?
14.
And because he was really struggling with, who am I? Am I an American? Am I Chinese? Am I, you know, what do I identify with?
What have I lost? I think.
Yeah.
In his culture.
Right.
And so it was good because he saw the difference between being an Asian American and being an Asian,
A
Chinese person.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to kind of go, okay, I do better, or I understand more about being an Asian American, and now I can work with that and just figure out my sub-identity within this predominant culture of American, because he didn't identify with very much of.
Well, he had no memories of China, so.
Right.
Yeah.
You relate to
And
that,
it wasn't what he
Elodie?
imagined in a way.
Yeah, and I think for me, I have not that, like, I'm not adopted. A lot of people have asked, but I think for me, I had that same struggle, you know, of moving here and having pretty much being raised by strangers, you know, like my parents who I live with here, my biological dad and my stepmom, but I met both of them at the same time together, and then moved pretty much, you know, kind of changed the story too, being plucked out of, you know, with my family, my country, and all that I knew, and then being brought here. And I had that same thing too, like preteen age was when I was like, I don't fit in. My whole family that I call family that I love are all white, you know, they're all my stepmom's side of the family, and they definitely took me in and definitely felt loved by them, felt like I was theirs. But yeah, it was, you know, I think like preteen is hard for anybody, you know, then you add a layer of who am I, you know, like, and yes, I think for me that was also really hard. And it wasn't until I didn't have the words or the vocab, you know, to also like be able to communicate that to my parents of, hey, I'm really struggling. It came out in like just
Thanks.
attitude, and just being a girl, trying to, figure out. But I think for me too, going back when I was 18, I just, that loss that you talked about, Kelly, I definitely felt that. And I still feel that, but I think going back and seeing how I have an amazing life. I would have had an amazing life, but I don't know, like, I think there's a huge gift in being able to go back and see it for yourself, and see the heart and the work that your parents or your adoptive parents put into you.
How did that help through all that with Chin Yi and your guys' experiences, but I think specifically related to adopting him from China and bringing him over, and the things that you went through as a family and as parents? How have you grown from that? What has that taught you?
What has it taught us? It's taught me that I thought that I really knew how to be a good mom, and I realized that I had a ton to learn in terms of empathy. Again, my girls look like me.
Right.
And so we had to learn how to parent differently. We had to learn that trauma wound of adoption is real, and doesn't go away. And that's something you can't, I think for the first couple of years, especially to his and my detriment, I just wanted him to be happy at all costs. I wanted him not to be to regret that he'd become part of our family, Yeah. And so the discipline wasn't the greatest because I didn't want him to be upset with me. I wanted him to love me. Yeah. And anyway, so I had to relearn a whole bunch of things. I had no trouble disciplining my daughters, but with Chin Yi, it was like, a very fine.
Like walking on eggshells kind of thing?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
I think also it made us contemplate or think about how different people can be. Like, it took us a long time to understand the differences of upbringing and training that he had and how they affected him. And I think it just opened up the kind of mystery of people are very, very influenced by their experiences. Because even someone who only experienced something to the age of 2 is very, very affected by what's happened in their past. And you have to be careful that you don't trip on that. And you would point at racism or us making a racist statement as a warning that don't trip, understand this is complicated. He wasn't thinking in those terms, but you got this understanding that this is not simple. You can't just overlay we couldn't overlay our understanding of how the world works and just assume that he was going to fall in the brackets that we put on that, if you will.
But it was his own insecurities too, and all of that, and recognizing his difference, and us saying, a lot of that too, I think, was a plea for, I'm going to do this. Are you going to love me anyway? Are you going to accept me anyway, even though I behave this way? And we had to reinforce our love for him, way more, I think, than with the girls. It was a natural acceptance from.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing all that. I know that can be a life experience that few of us really get to experience and learn from. But we do know a lot of people that have been adopted, and I think it's going to be really helpful for them and for our viewers out there, right, to really learn a piece of life and maybe how to approach people a bit differently.
My skin is gold. My skin is gold. My skin is gold. And when I look in sisters were gold.